Good day everyone, this is the Worm Whisperer here. I'd like to welcome you back to my channel. Before we get going, I'd like to take a minute to thank all my subscribers and everybody who's liked my videos. I hope that you're getting some use out of my videos and some tips and some information that's helping you out with your worm farm. Okay, so for today we're going to go over why your worms aren't migrating to your upper bins. I see a lot of questions on the forums, and I see a lot of questions around different places. They're all asking, why aren't my worms moving up? Why is there so many worms in my bottom bin when I want them to go up to my upper bin? So today I'm going to go over some reasons why your worms aren't migrating up, and so I'll give you some tips on how to get that going. Alright, so the reason why your worms aren't migrating, I like to use an analogy of the island. So basically your worm bins here are an island, and if you were a human and you were on these islands and you were stuck there and you had everything you ever wanted. Just imagine you had all your friends were there, you had all the food you ever wanted, you have everything you ever needed on that island. Would you want to move? Would you want to go anywhere else? No, you'd probably want to stay there. You'd want to stay on that island. You had everything you needed there, and you would probably never ever want to leave. So I kind of feel like the same thing with the worm bin. So if you've got a worm bin that has all kinds of good stuff in it, like this one here, like if I've got food in here and I've got all kinds of stuff for the worms to eat and they're happy and it's the right temperature and everything's going perfect in this bin, the worms aren't going to want to leave this bin. They're going to want to stay in here. They're not going to want to go anywhere. They're not going to want to move. They're going to stay here, and you're going to have to end up picking them out of the finished worm castings. And that's not what we want. We want the worms to move. We don't want them to stay in that bottom bin. We want them to work their way up. So to get started, what I like to do is I have a 4-tier worm bin. So what I'll do is I only feed the top 2 tiers of my bin, and this also works if you have a 2-tiered bin. You don't have to have a 4-tiered bin. If you have a 2-tiered bin, this will work exactly the same way. So what I'll do is I only feed the top 2 bins. So the bin underneath this one and this one here I will feed, and I'll give the worms food on these 2 bins. The 2 bottom bins I don't feed. So basically it's a 4-month process. So I feed the 2 top bins, and then I let the 2 top bins move down. So each bin moves down to a lower tier. And when it does, it's getting more processed and getting finer and finer worm castings. So when the worms get hungry, they're going to want to move. So as essentially I feed these top 2 tiers, the worms are going to smell, they're going to know about that food, they're going to have the juices running down into those bottom bins, and as they process the worm castings, there's less and less to eat in those bottom 2 bins. So as they run out of food in those 2 bottom bins, it's essentially like that island, and the food's going, their friends aren't there anymore, and they're saying, hey, why are we here? Let's get out of here. We don't want to be here with the bin. Is nothing here to eat. There's nobody here to talk to. Let's just get out of here. So the worms will essentially start saying, we're running out of food. We need to find more food. And that's the way you get them to migrate up in your bin. So if they're down there in that bottom bin, that's the one I use to process. So I will take that bottom bin out of the worm, of my 4-tier worm bin. I will take that bin out, and that will be the one that moves back up to the top, and that'll be the one I fill with food that looks like this one, and that's the one, and it'll start moving down through my tiered worm bin each month. So as I process each bottom bin, I bring that new one up to the top and refill it. So the 2 bottom bins are running out of food for the worms, and that encourages them to leave the bins. They're not going to want to stay there if there's no food in that bin. So that's basically the tips that I like to give. A lot of people, they're not sure why their bins, like they have to pick all those worms out of their bottom bins, and that's really the reason. It's if you're feeding the worms a lot in those bottom bins, they're just not going to want to leave. So you want to encourage those worms. You don't want to feed the bottom bin. You want to keep that bin being refined. You want to make it basically so the worms don't like it there anymore, and they want to leave that bin and go find food somewhere else. And that will encourage the worms to move up into your other bins that you are working on and you want to be processed into worm castings. And that works quite well for me. So at the end of the day, when you're going to process that bin, it's going to make it way, way easier to get those worm castings out and get the worms separated from the castings that you want to harvest. So you want those worms not to be there, and the less worms there is in that bottom bin, the easier it is to process and harvest those worm castings. So once again, here's some worm castings here. These have been processed. You can see these are quite a bit different than these ones here. So you can see these still have a lot of cardboard, a lot of cocoa coir, a lot of stuff in here for the worms to eat. So basically you want your bottom worm bin to look like these castings here. There's not much here to eat anymore for the worms, and the worms are hopefully coming out of this, because if they don't have anywhere else to go, they're going to eat their worm castings, and you don't want that. You want your worms to be eating this kind of stuff like this. This is what you want to turn into this. So if you're not feeding this bottom stuff on this one here, if you're not feeding this and you're feeding them this is going to make the worms want to move up and find more food, because that's their main driver in the worm bin is they're just looking for food. So the more food and the more encouragement you can get to get them to leave that bottom bin, leave this stuff here, the easier it's going to be to harvest that bottom bin. Alright, so that wraps up our tutorial for today. I hope that will help everybody become a better worm farmer. If you like my tips and you like my information that I'm giving out in these tutorials, I hope that you'll drop me a like or maybe subscribe to my channel. I appreciate you all showing up, and have a great day. Bye.